Well, good evening, everybody, or probably you Americans, it's probably still 6 a.m. there or something. Not quite.
Not quite. But, we are in the early hours of the morning here in California still, but the rest of the United States, I guess they're already into the day.
Yeah. And I mean, we, of course, in Africa are hours ahead of you. So we've paved the way for you all to have a beautiful day, because it has been. So happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa, and of course, our monthly slot with the awesome Mr. Leo Zagami. How are you, Leo? Welcome back. Nice to have you again.
It's great to be on your show, and it's great to be on your show as the first interview that will concern my brand new book, which is just out. It's been just published in the last 24 hours. And I'm really glad for your viewers and for the audience that will follow this video to have a brief, let's say, history about what I've been talking about, because, you know, I've been talking about a lot of things in my books. Volume 11 also coincides, yes, of course, with an anniversary that soon is coming here in the United States, a very important one. The anniversary, of course, of 9/11. So we have been talking, as you know, about certain elements concerning 9/11 in the past interview, because, of course, with Volume 10 and with the fact that I touched on Islamic Freemasonry, on the Islamic Illuminati, on 9/11 as a geopolitical operation that was orchestrated by the Western Illuminati together with their Middle Eastern counterparts. Now, instead, we go one step further. The people will say, well, this is interesting. What else has Leo Zagami to say now? Well, I have a lot to say. And, of course...
Straight talking, Leo. We love you. We love having you here, Leo. We all love you. As Linda says, love the straight talking, Leo. By the way, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So good to see you all here. And please feel free to chime in at any time and ask any questions if you have any for Leo.
Yes, I would actually like to show, if possible, to our audience, if you want to share the cover. This is the paperback, which includes, of course, the back cover.
Oh, nice. I'm glad you have it. Yeah.
Yes, and it has, of course, a brief description of the topics. You can also notice that the number 11 is somehow similar to the World Trade Center, and there is small details all over this, very symbolic details all over this cover. We have, of course, on your left, Thomas Crooks. On your right, you have Lee Harvey Oswald. You have also one of the makers of MK Ultra, and then we have references to both the CIA as well as psychological operations. So here we are with a brand new topic also to discuss, because, yes, I touched on this topic in the past since Volume 1, but never to the extent of making an entire book. And also because there is a lot of misconceptions about this topic, Chantal. And I wanted to clear it up. My father was a psychiatrist who in the 1960s participated to the MK Ultra project. He actually participated to their experiments on LSD in Paris. They were conducted in various university, hospitals, and so on by the medical establishment. And there is, like I said, a lot of misconceptions. So I would like to clear that. I mean, when we talk about MK Ultra, we're talking formally about a project that took place between 1953 and 1973. Then, of course, the genie came out of the bottle, though, because all those experiments inevitably brought out new techniques. And those new techniques became not only part, of course, of what the CIA or other US government agencies and institutions might do to us, but also part of a more general awareness amongst also those criminal organizations, but also the deep state that started to use those techniques. So we have to be very honest about the fact that there is a lot of misconception, because when you talk about MK Ultra, people refer to it as something that is happening still today. Today we have, let's say, the results of MK Ultra, the results of those experiments, and as well as new forms of mind control that were started after MK Ultra. And I touch also on those. I touch on the mind war that was inaugurated by the late Michael Aquino, who used to be a lieutenant colonel of the psychological operations. And I also touch on the future of cognitive warfare within NATO and all the rest. So this is not a book about conspiracy theories. This is a book about facts. And these facts are pretty scary. In fact, my wife, who is editing always my books, came out of this book. She was completely shocked. She had, of course, me talking about some of these subjects before. But after reading this book, she came to new realizations, because, first of all, we talk in this book about the origins of mind control. And so if we have to talk about the origins of mind control, these origins go back thousands of years. I mean, they don't go, back only to what was experimented here in the US in a relatively short period of time and recently. When it comes to psychological operations, for example, the first form of psychological operation, it's the one that was played by some of the greatest minds of the battlefield, people who fought wars, who conquered large parts of the world in a short time, like Genghis Khan, for example. He was somebody who used to use psychological operations to include fear in the people. The same thing can be said also about Napoleon. These were people who were very skilled. They knew that the mind of the person can be bent. And so, for example, Khan was a little bit like an illusionist. The illusionist is playing with cards, showing you one thing and the other. Now, Genghis Khan conquered half of the world, but he didn't do it only with his bunch of warriors from the middle of nowhere in Mongolia, a country that these days has nothing really to say. No. What happened was that he used to play these warriors he had, and he might actually show the enemy he had a lot more than what he actually had. He could show the enemy he had 1,000 warriors, even if he had 100 warriors, simply by bringing them in different parts of the battlefield and confusing the enemy, who was, and also there was nowadays psychological operations are, a professional, well put together kind of commodity, let's say, that the military uses. And so they have used it extensively in Iraq. They have used it extensively in Afghanistan. They have used it extensively in every theater of war in the last few decades. And you always send a small team of psychological operation warriors, let's say, to then prepare the arrival of the troops. And they do that in various ways. And the same thing was done by Genghis Khan. He would send a few of his psychological operation warriors ahead of his army, saying to the enemy, these people are fierce, they're going to kill you, they're going to rape your mother, they're going to... You don't want to have anything to do with Genghis Khan. This guy he will eat your heart alive. So these people, once Genghis Khan arrived, they were terrorized. They said, give him everything. And so that is psychological operation. That is basically including terror in the mind of the enemy. And I think that the most ancient form of psychological operation was taught by the guy who teach the art of war. In fact, his main text is known as the Art of War. I'm talking about Sun Tzu. So ancient China. In ancient China, we read about the art of war because that is one of the main texts that military people study when they go to a military school. But we don't know about the psychological connotations, about using spies, using informers, using also to inform the enemy about certain things that might be disinformation. Today, you see, we are living in the I live in the United States of America. The United States of America is the only country in the world that has laws that protect from psychological operations. No other country of NATO has these laws. And there is a specific reason that I explain very carefully in my new book. You can find my new book, Volume 11, of course, on Amazon. You will find the links on leozagami.com. But it's very important to read the title of this book, The Past, the Present, and Future of Mind Control, from Sun Tzu to MK Ultra and beyond. Because in my latest book, I go even further into nanotechnology and the future of mind control. So we start from thousands of years ago, we move all the way to where we are now. And it's a...
So what I just want to ask you, when we're talking about 1,000 years ago that mind control started, and I'm sure...
I'm talking about not 1,000, I'm talking about 3,000, maybe even more.
Yes.
You know? Because the elite of the Illuminati, the elite has always used psychological operations on their people under the form of religion, philosophy, or whatnot. I mean, that's the way. I mean, you have, of course, the use of conventional weapons to say, I am the king and you are my people. Yeah. But then you have to have psychological operations so you stay king. Otherwise, you're going to be beheaded. Otherwise, you're going to lose the battle. So that is, yeah, hope that was clear.
Yeah, so they would obviously use fear porn. So what I'm saying is if we can trace it back to what, 3,000 odd years ago, what you're saying?
I would say that, yes, Sun Tzu, definitely Sun Tzu gives us a timeline which is very, very ancient. But I would say that this timeline can be put even further back because, like I said, I mean, Sun Tzu is... even relatively recent because we don't know the exact time. It's between 771 to 256 BC. But even if we go further into the Babylonian times, even much further into the Chinese culture, we can see that Sun Tzu simply codified certain techniques that might already have been in use. So the thing is, who is mind controlling you? The high priest, the king? Is the priest and the high priest and the king knowing what they're doing? Of course they know what they're doing. They knew what they were doing when maybe skilled astronomers, even here in South America, in the ancient Mesoamerican cultures, used to say, okay, we will have an eclipse now. Let's tell the population that the world is going to go dark for 10 minutes if you don't sacrifice all your cattle or whatever. This is mind control. Of course, not yet codified. Now, as you know, we want to codify everything, and so we want to trace to somebody. The modern schools of psychological operations trace it to Sun Tzu. But like I said, maybe we can trace it even further. Sun Tzu was a Chinese military general, a strategist, a philosopher, who apparently lived in the Eastern Zhou period. So, like I said, between 700 to 200 BC. And in my book, I explain, though, the differences about also what meant to finally codify and make mind control a useful tool for a government, in particular, starting with the Soviet Union. And that's not a government, it's a dictatorship, of course, but it is a form of government. The Soviet Union, with Vladimir Lenin, employed a guy called Pavlov. Pavlov conducted a series of experiments on dogs before he conducted them on humans. And his experiments are about what is defined as classical conditioning. I give you, I show you something, and the dog reacts in a certain way because he knows that maybe after he's going to eat, or maybe he's going to go out and pee. This is the early forms of classical conditioning that were then studied further on. And of course, when the Soviets, the Soviet Union was established and Vladimir Lenin wanted to mind control his people, he went to Ivan Pavlov. And Ivan Pavlov told him, maybe, I can help you out. The goal was to use this research to better control the masses of Russia. So one of the first questions that Lenin made to Pavlov was, how can human behavior be controlled? Because, he said, in the new Soviet government, we are building a new world. So from that moment onwards, the communists understood that by studying the techniques of conditioning, they could condition the masses. Now, this is, like I said, everything in my book is very scary, because once you start studying it, and you start noticing also that Pavlov, yes, did these experiments in Soviet Union, but it didn't end up there, because immediately after Pavlov started these experiments, there were, of course, Westerners who started to mimicking what Pavlov was doing. And they even brought his experiments to more more extremes, so they could find techniques that will condition the human thought. So it's not about just blaming the Russians, because then the same techniques started to be used in the West. And this is only the beginning, because then Pavlov died in the 1930s, but by the 1940s, the Americans saw what was going on in Europe with the Germans, who have conducted also some really far-out mind control techniques in the concentration camps, brutal mind control techniques. And at that point, they said, okay, we're going to pick up the scientists, bring them to America. We need to do the same in America. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind in the mind control war. Now, there was you see, in the here now today, in 2024, when we talk about the subject of mind control, you usually have a reaction which is like, I'm not going to fall for that, and they laugh like idiots. In the 1950s, they were really worried. Our grandparents, they were worried, because the soldiers that were coming up back from Korea, the Korean War, the prisoners of war, had symptoms of brainwashing. And there was a real worry that the Soviets and the Chinese had actually conditioned in some form those soldiers. So then they had to counter react to all that. And that brought eventually to the formal establishment of Project Artichoke, and then later MK Ultra. And Project
Artichoke.
Yes, Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, and of course, then you have Project MK Ultra. Now, I tend to explain to people that all this came, of course, in the wake of a reaction that is quite natural. I mean, the infamous MK Ultra program carried out by the CIA from the 1950s was a reaction because we wanted somehow to, I mean, it was, the Second World War was brutal. The First World War were brutal. And both of these wars had seen a psychological operation conducted. There was also the involvement of the infamous Tavistock Clinic that after the war became the Tavistock Institute in England. And so the MK Ultra was a reaction that wanted to protect, in a way, the American people. So at the same time, though, America, the United States, because of all this mind control stuff going on, they were the only ones in the world who have a law against psychological operation of their own people. How did they bypass it? But then, because they create an alliance, NATO, they said, okay, we can brainwash all our allies. And that's not going to be punishable. So imagine that. So how are we going to brainwash our own people, though? Now, I explain in this book, in a very complex way, that the NATO came down with this diabolical idea. We make it illegal to brainwash people in the US. But at the same time, if we need to brainwash people in the US, we can resort to one of our allies. We can go to to an idiot in Italy, corrupt soldier, military intelligence operative in Italy, and tell them that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Oh, wow. And then bring back that PSYOP in the US and then convince the US that we have to go to war with Iraq. This is just to give you an example of a PSYOP conducted on the American people, but not by Americans. So they could always use the clause of plausible deniability. So if you are in South Africa, you don't have laws that protect you from PSYOPs. Your government can PSYOP you all the way they want. In Great Britain, the same. In Italy, the same. In France, the same. You can be all brainwashed. But if you attempt to brainwash the Americans, we have a law, a specific law. So you see, this is already gives you an idea of who is dictating.
But hang on, I'm gonna interject right here, because if what you're saying to me
about the laws here, the laws.
Okay, just hang on. But if you're saying that America is the only country that has laws that protect its citizens from being brainwashed, mind controlled.
It doesn't mean that they're not brainwashed, because they find ways of bypassing this.
But I think if you speak to the survivors, and you'll hear a very different story. You know, speak to people that have been, and children that have been subjected to that over the years.
Sorry, Chantel, I'm not saying that this law is respected.
No, it's not. I'm just saying that's such double standards. That's huge double standards.
Of course.
The biggest ever.
But that's why it needs to be exposed. That's why I needed to expose all this. And that's why
for sure.
important that people read my book, because they're going to see that there is actually laws that protect us here in the US, as well as not protecting you in your countries that are basically puppet countries of NATO, which is controlled by America.
Sure.
So,
of course,
for me, it was very important to write this book, because there is a lot of ignorance on this subject. And you see, my father was one of the most known psychiatrists in the world at one point. Even Pravda in Russia wrote about him. So he was chosen by Meyer, who was Carl Gustav Jung's disciple. And Carl Gustav Jung had an enormous say in MK Ultra, in Tavistock.
Right.
So my father is somebody who had experienced this directly. And I was teach techniques, for example, when I took LSD myself, my father taught me this technique. I had a special substance that I will use in case the LSD will go out of control. These are things that normal people don't know about. So there was experiments that were done, and I participated willingly myself to know more about what was done. So I think that is important. Like when people talk about Aldous Huxley, and they talk about the doors of perception, a brave new world. Oh, so wonderful. Jim Morrison was, oh, wow, he was inspired. The doors of perception, and everybody became hippie, and oh, wow. And everything seems fine and dandy. No, Aldous Huxley was part of the problem. He worked for Tavistock. He came here in California, and he worked for MK Ultra. So this is like brainwashing the masses. And they warned us about what they were doing. Because if you read actually carefully Huxley, you see that he's actually telling you what they were doing. And if you read George Orwell, 1984, from the same milieu of people that include all these great minds that almost seem prophetic, like, because George Orwell seems prophetic, Aldous Huxley seems prophetic, but in reality, they were also working for the establishment. Bertrand Russell was not just, and then you have H.G. Wells, who even invented the word New World Order. So This is about making clarity and finally making you understand who is behind the death of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who is behind the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, because it's the same people. And that's why RFK was called by Trump 2 hours after the attempted assassination. 2 hours. I just been arrested. Yeah. Because the moment in which they attempted to kill Donald J. Trump, Trump is not an idiot. He knew that there was a deep state mechanism around him that made that possible. Now, you know, we have this corrupt FBI, which is just as corrupt as they were in the time of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Yes.
And so today, we still have thousands of files that are top secret about the Kennedy assassination. And people are, you know, we were promised these files ages ago, and still we are there. Where are these files? Yes, in 2017, even Trump released some, but in the end, he was almost held at gunpoint, and he couldn't release all of them. Because then there is other experiments that I talk about in my book, experiments that have been conducted for 100 years about putting chips in your head and controlling your thoughts. And this was already possible at the time of Lee Harvey Oswald, who himself was actually a willing candidate for MKUltra because he was a Marine, he was stationed in Japan, and he wanted to participate to these experiments. So he would be prepared, brainwashed, and then sent into Russia as a defector. Nobody ever questions the fact, how is it possible that Lee Harvey Oswald left Russia after he went there, even, you know, then marries a Russian woman and all that, and the embassy even gives him money to come back? Please, Lee, come back to us. Wow, you're great. Come back. I mean, are people idiots? So, of course, we like to blame the Russians for having, you know, there was a complex operation made by the CIA. I explained this in the book with documents and everything on how to blame everything on the Russians when in reality, yes, the Russians conducted experiments, similar experiments, but it's more highly probable that he was working for the CIA when he ended up killing Kennedy. And he was probably not only it wasn't the only shooter present that day, like maybe Thomas Crooks was not acting alone. Now, regardless of the second shooter theory in Trump's attempted assassination, there is actually an image of him that shows that he was on the phone while he was about to shoot, taking probably either orders or communicating with other parties. Now, we don't know who they are. And we will probably never know, because when you have the FBI involved, yesterday they came out and said to America, we're still wondering, why did Thomas Crooks try to kill Trump? Oh, why? Why? Of course, the guy is brainwashed. And he's brainwashed because his father and mother are two therapeutics, they are psychologists.
Yeah.
The father and mother, both of Thomas Crooks, are therapeutic. They have a license that you can hold in America only if you study psychology. So
right.
You want me to believe that your mother and father didn't know that you are crazy, and even the father the year before even changed the gun he used for the attack on Trump. He changed the name to his son. Oh, have this gun, go and kill. You know, I mean, and we are meant to believe that these people didn't know it. When we see the only videos, testimony of Trump, of Thomas Crooks' parents, we see these people are too leftist. Wow, man. I mean, just go and check them out on YouTube. A couple of videos only by Fox Digital, made one on the 23rd of July. And that is very symbolic also, because suddenly on the 23rd of July, his body was cremated. And so nobody will ever know what he had in his body, how they controlled him. Ooh. And then days before, 15th of July, while he was doing that, in the north of California, they were doing the cremation of care ritual. Cremation of care. And 10 days after, he was cremated himself. So if people want us to believe these are coincidences, you can believe whatever you want. But my book is going to bring you knowledge that you will have nowhere else. And it's going to blow your mind, because this book is about freeing yourself from the controls, the restrictions that this society imposes on us.
Absolutely. You know, what you were saying as well about just going back to as far back as we can remember or know, this type of control has been going on. So it's so important to realize. And you know, again, we're at the time where a lot of people are waking up to that. That's obvious. I mean, since the pandemic, that has definitely been something that's occurring. But by the same token, and it's true what you say as well, what we're seeing a lot of now is the results of MK Ultra that I think took place a lot of that I'd say in the 70s, 60s, 70s.
Well, you see, the thing is this, Chantel, in 1973, very conveniently, the then director of the CIA, destroyed most of the documents. He said, oh, I was very scared because the Watergate scandal, this and that, so we had to eliminate all the evidence. Evidence of what? What it has to do with the Watergate scandal and Nixon? Well, there is a connection actually there, but you have to discover it in my book. Anyway, the fact that they destroyed all the evidence means that we will never have clear all the vast range of experiments that were conducted in all the 149 sub-projects of MK Ultra.
Never. How would you say, if we're looking at sort of the older techniques they were using, and there's no doubt in my mind that these guys would have obviously been advancing just in exceptional ways to advance the techniques to gain control. So I'm sure it probably over the years got worse and worse and probably more and more cruel, because we know how they do that nowadays with a lot of the MK Ultra survivors. So how would you say, when you say there's new MK Ultra programs
I would say
actually now?
Sorry, I would say actually the contrary. I would say that the techniques became less and less painful the more advanced they became. That's why now we are all brainwashed thanks to our social networks and just simply having a phone in our hands. We don't need to have sleep deprivation, drugs, lights that flash and all the rest. We just simply need a phone. And then they're going to start flashing things through the phone, and then they're going to brainwash us. So now there is a more subtle persuasion, which is much more insidious, and that is part of the ultimate development of that classical conditioning of Ivan Pavlov, which I talked at the beginning of our show. So MK Ultra was about research that was conducted in a time in which, not only in the CIA, because then there was similar research being carried out in the military at Fort Detrick in particular, these experiments were based on the use of drugs. But drugs ultimately used together with hypnotism, of course. Because first of all, they understood that hypnotism on its own doesn't work. I can come there and say, Chantel, watch me, give me your eye.
Exactly.
You know, and then maybe I can condition you, but if you are skilled, you can avoid the conditioning. Instead, I mix mesmerism, which is basically an hypnotism, which is a development of mesmerism, which, by the way, it's a creation of the Illuminati, because Mesmer was an Illuminati, just like Count Cagliostro used to go around Europe, one of the heads of the Illuminati, and hypnotize people. But they mixed that together with the drugs. And Mesmer and Cagliostro did the same. The Illuminati understood that and here we go back to volume 10, the mix of drugs, like the assassins, the Nizari assassins of the Ismaili sect that we discussed in regards to volume 10, they use hashish together with hypnotism. There was a substance. So the mix
it opens.
It opens, It makes you control better because you are. So they use all this MK Ultra.
More open to suggestion. Would you say, because obviously we understand mind control is all about suggestion. So obviously, as you say, and I think you're probably right, but I don't believe. I mean, I think that maybe according to CIA documents, they might say they put headphones and flashing lights and things on. That's not how they do it. I mean, there's a lot of trauma.
No, there is a lot of trauma. And I said, all that trauma, induced trauma with drugs, things, induced sleep deprivation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
At one point, Timothy Leary, which was the guru of LSD, at the end of his life, and I met Timothy Leary once, I had the privilege of meeting him in the 90s in London. He said, the internet is the new LSD. So
sure.
That's it. You don't need those substances when you have advanced algorithms that can detect your thoughts in your mind. So I think that MK Ultra was good for its period. I mean, good, bad, exceptionally bad, but it was something related to the period in which, in fact, we can see the results of that MK Ultra, especially in the 60s and 70s, in the use of drugs by the masses and everything. You know, there were actually MK Ultra agents going around Europe giving LSD to people, so experimenting and also pushing the society into various directions that were unprecedented because LSD opened up to certain perceptions that so it was actually open to Europe.
Wasn't LSD created in America somewhere in the 60s?
No, it was actually LSD was created in Switzerland, and the exclusivity was by the Sandoz laboratories. At one point, though, the CIA wanted this drug to experiment, and so they went with I think an enormous amount of money for back then, a few $100,000. They went to the Sandoz laboratory and purchased it. And then they brought it back. But the Sandoz laboratories didn't want to have anything to do with these experiments. And at one point, they stopped the production of LSD altogether. My father, who was doing those experiments, at one point in the 70s, when they stopped the production, he was forced into going into the black market to find those drugs so he conducted experiments. So this, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was a little kid, and my father would bring me to this commune of crazy people where he would purchase this stuff, and then he would conduct these experiments on these people. And I was like very young, but I remember that. So I remember also one thing he told me, a story. This is a story actually I didn't put in the book, but it might be an interesting anecdote. He used to go at times to Greece to conduct these experiments. And in these little islands, because he always said that in the islands it was more easy to control the population. So what happened was, he said, Leo, at one point I went there and this guy materialized out of nowhere. He was a Spanish guy who knew a lot, knew the head of the police, knew this, knew that. And he was the main supplier for LSD in Greece. And he told me all these stories about this guy. And he was like, this guy was basically welcome everywhere and anywhere. You have to understand, Chantel, the LSD at one point arrived even in the White House. JFK, before he died, he experimented LSD. And it was a friend of Timothy Leary who gave him LSD. So here we're talking about, it wasn't just a drug used for controlling. It was a much more complex thing, much more complex. And so,
what were they trying to achieve with it? Because if you look at LSD, it's kind of like an hallucinogenic, right? So, I mean, different drugs have different experiences.
Did you ever take it? No, because I'm very honest about it. I took it.
Yes, I did. I have taken LSD. I have, yes.
So the moment in which you take LSD, you change the perception of the things around you. You have
yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, like I said just a moment ago, their intention was not, I mean, of course, there were people like my father who wanted to conduct very detailed researches into the mind, this and that. But the basic research that the CIA wanted to conduct was simply to know if they could control people using this drug or make them reveal things. Now, they failed on
exactly.
that. They failed. I mean, at one point, one guy ended up throwing himself from the window, or they throwed himself from the window, the famous Frank Olson. Frank Olson was the victim that in 1953 ended up his life. He was a bacteriologist trained at the University of Wisconsin. He was recruited by the CIA for MKUltra. He began to express doubts about it, though, and he told his wife that it might have been a terrible mistake before, of course, his life was ended. He was suicided. This situation about Olson was actually the main scandal, and probably the only scandal that ever went out of the MKUltra top secret, ended up in the White House, because then the family of Frank Olson was received in the White House and they had to apologize to the family. So that was the only case. But probably there is thousands of cases similar. There was at one point, San Francisco, out of all places in America, after New York, was chosen as a hotspot for a new kind of MKUltra experiment. The initial MKUltra experiments were people who willingly agreed to participate, like Lee Harvey Oswald. The other kind of experiments were the ones instead conducted on unwilling and people not even knowing. They were simply going
and
with
children.
That was another branch altogether. And actually, that was really terrible set of experiments that were conducted by people like Cameron in Canada. And that was really terrible stuff, because it wasn't only about using the drugs, it was literally about trying to split their personality with trauma-induced techniques that were lacerating for an individual. And that's why, because of, they wanted to always have the plausible deniability or avoid the laws, they ended up conducting it in the most brainwashed country in the planet, Canada. Oh, Canada, which is still the best. In my book, I think that Canadians need to read this book, Chantal, and I'll tell you why. Because not only they had the MKUltra experiments, but there is evidence, and this is certified with documents, that they conducted also a massive psyop during the pandemic. I'm not going to go into the details because otherwise this video is going to be removed. But you can find it, of course, in my book. There is evidence, because there is evidence that was conducted. I mean, there was a research conducted even by the military, Canadian military, when this scandal erupted because of their own newspaper that exposed, I think it was called the Ottawa Chronicle, I don't know, the Ottawa Citizen. They revealed all these details about this experiment that went on during the pandemic. And I tell you, it's heartbreaking to see the level of brainwashing the Canadians still to this day are subject.
Yeah. I honestly think that Europe and America are the worst hit when it comes to being brainwashed. Hey, actually having said that, I mean, Australians are having and always have had a really rough time.
I tell you the worst, let me tell you the chart of the worst hit countries so you can understand why. The worst hit countries are Canada, New Zealand, Australia, for one reason. They are part of the former British Empire and they are considered as B citizens from the UK.
Right, exactly.
So the Tavistock Institute, likes to conduct their experiments in these countries, which are, and they have always the possibility of not being then traced back to them. Because remember that every time something filters out of these experiments or these projects, then there is big scandals that erupt. I mean, in Canada, they actually had to give a certain amount of money to some of the victims, even as children that were traumatized by these experiments. However, because of a law, they tried to get other money, but in the end they gave very little money altogether, because they used this camouflage of saying, oh, well, Canada retroactively, you can't use this law for foreign countries because it was the US. So in the end, you're not going to get anything. That's it. They always find, you see, these people, they don't only have the medical establishment in their hands, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the doctors, the health establishment, everything. They have also, of course, the military industrial complex in their hand, and they have the news, the media in their hands. So nothing ever comes out, no? But one thing, leaving Canada alone for a moment, because we have mass shootings here in America, and people talk about mass shootings all the time. Why we have all these mass shootings? Well, when did this mass shooting start? In the 90s. And what else started in the 90s? Prozac. Antidepressants that were initially discovered and launched.
And for kids as well. The one for kids, Ritalin, Prozac and Ritalin came out at the same time.
I talk about both in my book. I talk about reason, I talk about Prozac. But of course, they have two different ways of operating in the mind. So I specifically explain what happened. I mean, Prozac is fluoxetine, while instead, but in the end, these random shootings at school, post office, in shopping malls are not random at all, because they have made it way too easy to push this garbage on people.
Right.
And unfortunately, the results are terrible. I mean, when you take when I remember this in the 1990s, it was 1993, 94. I was conducting the Magic of Abramelin in the Mage. The Vatican didn't want me to carry on this operation. I was targeted by them. And at one point I was locked up, and they wanted to force me to take this bullshit Prozac stuff. So, I had my father who was an expert, and I was saying to my father, are these people insane? Do they think I would be brainwashed by the garbage? So I picked up, I remember this doctor said, Leo, I give you this big, and he gave me like, I don't know, there must have been like 1,000 Prozac in a big jar, this big. And he said, this is my gift to you. Okay, I picked up the jar. You know what they did? I went to London.
What a wonderful gift.
Listen, because it's even more funny. I go to London. I invite all my friends from the Ministry of Sound. I remember my friend DJ Harvey and everybody else. And I make a big party. I open the jar. Whoever wants fluoxetine Prozac, you can have it. And it was a great party. And they ended up there. That's it. A one-off. A big jar. Massive jar.
So was everyone very happy at the party? Was everyone
the party was great. We had a wonderful time. I think people were ever so happy. I mean, that's the way you should approach it. I mean, if it's a joke, it's a joke. And so these people, they wanted to control me, but of course it was very difficult for them because, my father was one of the experts in this field. So he would just laugh at whatever they wanted to do, and I would be laughing with him. And so that's how it went.
But I want to ask you, I mean, it's the first time you've actually mentioned your dad as well as your involvement in MK Ultra. Yes. So reverse a little bit back there, because I think we're all quite interested to know about that. When you say your dad was involved, in the MK Ultra programs, how was he involved? And when you say you were involved, how were you involved? Were you
I got involved.
Things?
I got involved not directly. My involvement was, of course, an indirect involvement, because I asked my father if I could experiment myself, and I said, help me out, because I want to. I had a guy from the 'Ndrangheta mafia. It was one of the most fierce mafia in Italy. He had the opportunity of getting, because it was really difficult to get pure LSD, almost impossible. Because a drop you can do I don't know, thousands of trips, but then they mix them with other stuff. So LSD, pure LSD, after the Sandoz laboratory ceased the production, was very difficult. However, I got this guy who was called Antonio Gallo, who I met when I was actually involved in Operation Gladio, who said, Leo, I have this stuff. I don't know what to do with it. They gave it to me. So I said, well, don't worry. Give it to me. I'm going to use it. Of course, I mean, it was... So once I got it, I said to my father, how should I use it? And that's how I got involved. And so my father, of course, Elio Zagami is a well-known researcher. But what happened was this. In the 60s, he went to France with my mother, and he participated to this documented research at the Institute of Psychology in the University of Paris on behalf of Project MK Ultra. Remember, like I said, Project MK Ultra ceased to exist formally in 1973. That didn't stop, however, my father from conducting his own personal experiments, which led to the writing of a book which is called Fumaster, which I have somewhere. I think it's this here. This is the experiments of my father. This was a book which he published at the end of the 70s. Okay. Now, this book never came out because after he published it, at 3 o'clock at night, a guy called, and I still remember that code scared the shit out of my father. This guy was from the Italian intelligence. He said, Dr. Zagami, you just have received a copy of your book here. I don't think you want to distribute this book. You might incur in some problems of a personal nature. I remember my father at that point freaked out in the middle of the night, went to my mother and said, they threatened me. I'm not going to go on with distributing this book. This book is now distributed by me and my brother on eBay. But this book is about experiments that they didn't want people to know about at the time. Okay.
But were they? Because we a lot of the survivors talk about the Gateway program as well. So that was, I know a lot of the kids in the 70s. I think that actually started the 70s. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat knows when it started. Just pop it in there, please. Which is literally where they,
in the 70s, I was viewing my father's experiments. He never experimented on me in the 70s. But by the
was your dad involved in the Gateway experiments though?
He was, like I said, he had been involved formally with the Sorbonne in Paris in those experiments. And in the 70s, he conducted his own experiments. He had various groups. He founded a group called GAPA. GAPA was Gruppo Autonomo di Psicologia Analitica, meaning Independent Group of Analytical Psychology, which still exists in Italy. And he conducted these experiments, but with also other professionals of the field, of course. But at one point, he kind of went from 1975, he kind of went rag. He left the profession altogether and he said, I'm going to conduct my experiments out of the academic field because I don't want to have anything to do with MK Ultra. I don't want to have anything to do with the Tavistock Institute. I don't want to have anything to do with... One thing I still remember, and this I wrote in my book, my father, we were in Sicily, talking to my mother, very much in pain about the fact that they were using psychology against political people, for the political abuse of psychiatry. Now, today, this kind of abuse, historically, they always blame it on Russia. Yes, the Soviets used to use the political abuse. But it's not only in Soviet. I mean, I was myself a victim of it. I
think that's a psyop in itself, that Russia gets blamed for everything. I mean, all the movies you see, the just the programming there in itself I mean, if you go right back to when I remember like watching the Rocky movies or whatever it was in the 80s, always the Russians are the bad guys, right? So you always, and
Always
just
blame
in
it
the
on them.
movies,
Yes.
in the
And
movies, you see the Russians always bad.
But I remember, and this is something personal, because, you know, when you're a child, these things, they hit you very hard, you know. And I remember my father literally with really angry, almost with tears in his eyes, talking with my mother about the political abuse of psychiatry. He didn't want to be part of it. He said, I'm not going to be part of this. I don't want to be doing this. This is not ethic. It's not moral. And actually, the paradox is that me, Leo Zagami, the son of Elio Zagami, in 2014, when I participated to the social unrest of the Pitchfork Revolution in Italy, I was picked up by the police, brought into a mental institute, conducted by a guy who, in front of my lawyer, said, I'm working for the Tavistock Institute. And I was like, wow, you made me happy. I'm going to put in my next book. I was like, you know, so I really suffered. But I also saw that the political abuse of psychiatry was used in Norway, in a place where they tried to lock me up in Norway when I rebelled to the OTO. I talk about that in volume 1 of my confessions. So to blame everything on Russia, when you have done the same, if not worse, here in the West, it's just like hypocrisy at the maximum levels. So my father didn't want to have anything to do with that political abuse of psychiatry. And in the end, he made a choice. He just said to my mother, I'm going to leave the profession altogether. He didn't want to be, I mean, this guy was not only, he was a doctor in neuro, I mean, he had various masters, various things. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with it. The academic world is corrupted. And so I took it from there on. And that's why I didn't become a doctor myself. That's why I didn't go and follow up in my father's footsteps. Otherwise, I could have been now one of the leading psychiatrists in the world. You know, I could have been like that guy, Jordan Patterson, whatever his name is, who goes and plays the good guy on his interviews. And he's so cool, and he wears a nice fancy jackets and stuff, and likes to play. Jordan Peterson is today, everybody, Jordan Peterson, wow, Jordan Peterson, you know. But let's be honest about Jordan Peterson, because
No, I agree. Carry on. Sorry, carry on.
Let's be honest about Jordan Peterson. He's a very intelligent guy. He's a psychologist, an essayist. I mean, I love his work, but guys, he was a teacher for many years in Canada. He's part of the system as much as anybody else. Of course, now he has walked out of that system. He has more credibility. But still, he's part of a system that permits him to have millions of views and to be always there, you know, interviewing this or this other, being called on Fox News, on this other. Oh, wow, Jordan Peterson is criticizing Canada because I have done this or that. Or the guy is an expert in mental health. I mean, I really dig his work. But still, you have been part of the system. You were a university professor in brainwashed Canada, out of all places. Leo Zagami is not that. Leo Zagami is a guy who is trying to survive after exposing all this. And today, I don't even have the possibility of being on InfoWars anymore, because Alex Jones got scared by his people who are financing him. And so then he took me off the whole programming. And I was there for many years with him. And I took many risks for exposing the Vatican when I was living in Italy for him. So my work today is to continue exposing the New World Order and, of course, what I described in a very generalistic term as Illuminati with my books. Now, in this book, there is also another element that nobody has ever discussed. Not only the mind control that the establishment exercises on you, but the mind control it exercises on its own members, the Illuminati, the Freemasons. So the psychology of initiation that actually it's driving those people, because how is it that they are so obedient to their grandmasters? How is it that they comply to this ideology and this plan? Well, I explain it because there is actually experiments that have been conducted in the field, and these experiments will be quite shocking once you read the book, because you're gonna be like, whoa, so this is how they keep them in check. Yeah, that's how they keep them in check. So of course, what is an initiation? If you think about it, even the most known initiation, which is the one of the Freemasons, is a trauma-based initiation. You are blindfolded, and then suddenly you're brought around the lodge, and you don't know what's happening to you, noises, things, lights. It's trauma-based. So this might be symbolic, and many people say, oh, but Freemasonry is all symbolic, so you shouldn't worry. In the end of the day, we don't kill people. We just say we kill people, but it's okay. In the initiation, you are threatened with throat being slit, heart being torn, this and that. After the P2 scandal, the United Lodge of England came up with an escamotage. They said, they have the initiation, but at the end of the initiation, it says, oh, it's only symbolic. You take it for, don't worry, When instead before, and in traditional Freemasonry, it wasn't symbolic at all. So that is the way they defend themselves. And I have a lot of respect for Freemasonry as a mystery school and what I have learned from it. But we have to also be honest. There is people within Freemasonry who use it for their own purposes, especially the mind control experts.
Yes,
I was in lodges where the worshipper master was a mind control expert, and it was a completely different field from a lodge of a guy who is just there conducting the lodge like he would be conducting the Rotary Club and just social. Okay, let's have a drink after you do the ritual, but everybody's laughing and let's eat after a pizza, whatever. No, there is people that conduct their lodge in a mind control way. And there is special lodges that the Illuminati tend to be part of. They are considered irregular lodges. I remember there is one in particular in France, in Montpellier. And they claim to be part of a lineage that goes back to Cagliostro, but also a lineage that claims to have very advanced knowledge of neurolinguistic programming, mind control, mesmerism. And one of their practices that left me shocked was the new recruit, the new initiate, will be brought into the center of the lodge, and they will give him a boiling cup of coffee. Boiling meaning super boiling. They will give it to him in his hand, and then they will say, block. And the guy will be like, until his hand was literally melting, Then at that point, they say, you can move. But it was like a mind control thing they were doing, so they would see how respectful the guy would be. And this guy was suffering. And I personally, of course, when I saw these kind of things in lodges, and they were not regular lodges, and this doesn't happen in your average lodge you have publicized at the entrance of each city in the United States. Forget about it. I'm talking about specific lodges.
Sure.
But it was shocking. It was shocking to see certain practices. And of course, we have then many other initiations. Here in America, you have all the initiations of the college fraternities, of the secret societies in college, which have, also brought a lot of criticism, because you have practices that the haste, they have been hazed, and there is, amongst the people who get initiated in these secret societies, they conducted in one survey of over 11,000 American college students. Of the 55% that had been hazed, only 10% believed they had been hazed, and only 5% reported, because most of these people go along with their initiation. When, and this is another thing interesting, when, for example, in the early 19th century, there was a big scandal. It's known in Freemasonry as the Morgan, I think it's known as, I think it was the Morgan affair. I don't remember. There was basically a guy who, he died, and they blame it on the fact that he had allegedly revealed the rituals of Freemasonry. Okay? Now, this whole thing, the Morgan affair, or whatever it's called, I mentioned it in, I think, volume 1 of my Confessions, ended up, though, influencing Americans so much that they even created an anti-Masonic party with a candidate for the presidential election. So it was very popular at that time, this whole thing. But then what happened was that while there were certain fraternities, college fraternities, like the Greek ones, the one with the Greek letters that started, like the one that Kamala Harris is a member of one of them, they started to open up. And even if the rituals were based on Freemasonry, they tend of wanting to open up and make them public and make the hazing diminish when it was criticized, no? But then there were a counter reaction that produced Skull and Bones, because in that period, the people from the Skull and Bones at Yale University saw what the Greek society letters were doing, societies, Greek letter societies, the Alpha P, I call them, I don't know if you ever heard of them in South Africa, but they have all this name, Alpha P, Beta, or whatever. That's why it's called Greek letters fraternities. The people in Yale said, well, you are too wishy-washy. You are becoming too mild. We want to go back to the roots. And that's what brought the Skull and Bones to be the Skull and Bones. So it also creates this kind of reaction. I also, in my book, talk about the initiations of the Skull and Bones, of course, which is the oldest senior class society at Yale University, but I also talk about the Bullington Club in England. This is very important, the Bullington Club, because we had prime ministers from the Bullington Club. We had Boris Johnson, we had David Cameron, and their initiations are pretty vile. I mean, they're very, very Clockwork Orange. They go to a homeless person and burn 50-pound note in front of them. That is one of their initiation. Another initiation consists of them always in this kind of setup.
Come on, that is just cruel.
I know, but it is even worse when they put their dick in the mouth of a dead pig. So, I mean, we are talking about some pretty far out stuff here. The Bullington Club is, I think, is more similar to what you find in the Clockwork Orange of Stanley Kubrick. The Clockwork Orange of Stanley Kubrick is one of those movies. Of course, in my book, I discuss certain movies that I invite people to see. Now, today, MK Ultra is too overly pop, so you find it also in movies that are really demented, like, you know, the Ultra American Story, things like, I mean, a little bit too. But there is certain movies that are very important, regardless of MK Ultra, regarding mind control. One of them, of course, is The First Manchurian Candidate. That was a movie that was prohibited after it came out for decades with Frank Sinatra. That movie was prohibited because Frank Sinatra called Kennedy to have this movie approved and passed by the censorship. But then Kennedy died because of a Manchurian Candidate. And so this movie was made disappear. Then they made a new version of the Manchurian Candidate, I think with Denzel Washington, many years after. But they changed the plot in a way that the Manchurian was not anymore the Manchurian referring to actually the place that there were these experiments were initially conducted because of the involvement of the Chinese or the Soviets in the Korean War. No, it was it was different. It was a different kind of thing. But still, there is the topic of brainwashing and of the Manchurian candidate being a guy who ends up wanting to kill a presidential nominee or a guy elected. I don't remember now, the Washington one. But it is about trigger words, about programming. So the Manchurian Candidate in both versions is a movie that needs to be seen, as well as, of course, Clockwork Orange. Clockwork Orange is a movie that for many reasons needs to be seen. And it's a pretty scary movie.
Yes.
The substance.
Is it still around? That movie is so old. Is it still around? Clockwork Orange.
Clockwork Orange is a classic that I don't think will ever. I mean, Stanley Kubrick did movies like that one, and of course Eyes Wide Shut, that I think, and many others that indicate. I think it's. I mean, it's a dystopian. It was an adaptation of Anthony Berger's 1962 dystopian thriller, and it's incredible because it has elements. The way they were dressed, they go around, very similar to how the Bullington Club goes around. And what they did to the homeless person in that movie, there's a lot of similarities. The drug they take, this mix, this weird thing,
Yeah.
And then when they get him and he gets, his eyes open and he's forced into watching things, that is mind control at its
true. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think that is important for people to see, because objectively it's an important thing. There is, like I said, nowadays MK Ultra has become a pop thing. So nowadays people tend to exaggerate. When it came to Thomas Crooks, I opened my book, in fact, stating that if we have to be honest about it, MK Ultra was formally dismantled in 1973. So you can't say that Thomas Crooks is part of MK Ultra because he wasn't even born in 1973. So you have to be honest about it. But his techniques are present. And then also there's another reason. While Lee Harvey Oswald might have actually been a Manchurian Candidate programmed within MK Ultra as a volunteer, instead, Thomas Crooks might have been either psyoped from like many young people today. They are the victim of psychological operations, and even if they are unaware of it, because, like you said, there is constant brainwashing attempts that are pushed on the general population, and those constant attempts are part of a psychological operation. Now, a psychological operation is a less personal thing, but it hits you in the same way. I mean, why did he want to kill Trump? Who brainwashed him to make him kill?
To do that, yeah.
That is a psychological operation. So I think it's very important to distinguish. I mean, Thomas Crook was probably never part of a specific program, but we don't know. He could have also been injected stuff, or he could have taken. It's very suspicious, the fact that they have cremated their body. That is very suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and they did it in a rush. That's why at the beginning of August, nobody knew that his body had been cremated. It was only because a Republican representative went there and asked, "Can I see the body?" "Oh, sorry, it's been cremated."
Absolutely.
So that's why my book also then brings you into the subject of nanotechnology and of the latest, because we talked about drugs, we talked about but nowadays we are talking about scientific discovery of nanoparticles that can be used to control the minds of mice. And this invention was actually announced a few days before the attempted assassination. This is an official study that is being conducted in South Korea. You can go in the internet and find it. And I also explained how they are programming the human biocomputer. Because, of course, this is a term that goes back to another of the infamous experimenters of MK Ultra, Dr. Lilly. This is another guy that not very many people know about today, who was at one point considered a guru in the 1960s among the LSD, Timothy Leary loving kind of people. But Dr. Lilly had he died in 2001, but he worked for the CIA and MK Ultra within the mental health establishment, also here in San Diego, 2 hours from where I live. He then also experimented with dolphins and all that because they wanted to train dolphins into attacking, all this rubbish. But his experiments...
I've heard terrible stories about that. There were the dolphins on LSD and stuff like that.
Now, he
said
that all human beings, all persons who reach adulthood in the world today are programmed biocomputers. So how are we going to program them? Now, at the time of Lilly, they didn't have the nanoparticles they have today and the way to they're going to make you eat something and you're going to find yourself with nanoparticles in your brains, and they're going to be triggering you and manipulating you with a joystick like you are a puppet. So you better read this book to understand what they're doing, because this is science, it's not conspiracy theory. And the thing that we're, there is personal papers from the late 1950s of Dr. Lilly of Stanford University that talks about the behavioral modification and control of human agents. So they have been obsessed with this for decades. Nowadays, they can do things in a way that are untraceable. That's why, though, untraceable up to a certain extent, because that means there must have been something that we could have traced if the body of Thomas Crooks wasn't cremated. So, I think that this book is going to shock a lot of people, because I describe in detail the metaprogramming, the programming of the human biocomputer, and how now they have created a technology called nanomind. Nanomind stands for Magnetic Interface for Neurodynamics. Now, this technology contains the human brain contains is a complex network of over 100 billion neurons. And you see, when the MK Ultra program tried to control people through the use of substances, it was quite primitive. Nowadays, they have this technology, aided also by AI, makes it just like perfect. We are creating, as we speak, brainwashed individuals, control robots, basically, that will kill anybody and do anything. The experiment, we went from the first experiment on animals that maybe they didn't involve invasive surgery, but they had this bulky external system, bells and stuff, to the nanoparticles of today that are inserted in the mice. The mice, they don't feel neither the bells, neither they have anything invasive in them. They act normally, because it's a very subtle thing. It's not, we go back to what you said before. Yeah, the experiments were very brutal, but nowadays the new technology makes it much more easy and less brutal. It doesn't mean that in the end the result is not the same and is not less dangerous.
Yeah. I would say it's probably much more effective the way they're using it nowadays, because they're using like these direct energy weapons. There's terrible things they're doing.
That's another topic
right
that I touched in my book, and that's I'm actually glad that you, because we don't have much time left, I'm glad that you brought it up. We talked a lot about in the past the Havana syndrome, these directly energy weapons. Let's not forget that we are, as human beings, emanating a magnetic field around us. And in fact, it was Michael Aquino, who was a great proponent of this kind of weapons, who termed he coined this term, the Homo magneticus, So the Homo magneticus is subject to these magnetic fields. Now, the first technology, though, that we finally have to freely control specific regions of the brain has been announced only in July of this year by Jin Woo Heon, who is the director of the EBS Center of Nanomedicine in South Korea. So this book is the present, is the past, but is also the future of mind control. And that is
right.
Maybe the most scary part of my research and what I'm revealing in volume 11 of my Confessions, which we are discussing today, which you can find, of course, on Amazon, and you can find the link to my website at leozagami.com. But let's not forget that the thing that scared me more was the development after MK Ultra, which nobody has ever discussed because nobody knows what happened after. And instead, I discuss it. The experiments from 1973, which saw the participation of people like Colonel Alexander, Stubblety, Michael Aquino, and many other militaries, are detailed in my book. And they gave birth to a new thing that Michael Aquino coined and termed mind war. Mind war is the future of mind control for Aquino, who didn't want any invasive. He was actually, believe it or not, Michael Aquino was fairly critical of MK Ultra, very critical of MK Ultra, but because he knew that the technology would bring us ways of controlling the minds without all this invasive gadgetry or stuff done on your body or substance abuse of any kind. And in fact, the moment Aquino, in the early 1990s, he then retired formally from his work in psychological operations, that was the moment in which in Iraq, for the first time, they started to use Michael Aquino's techniques in the field. And those techniques are listed in my book. I was in contact with Michael Aquino when I was in the Illuminati. I was in contact with him, and I invited him to Monte Carlo. At the time, I was a very different person. I wanted to know more. I was always very eager to learn, and we had this correspondence with Michael, and it was based mostly on our common love at the time for theosophy, but also about mind control. He actually held in high esteem my father. So the late Michael Aquino, he liked to be called Dr. Michael Aquino. He was, of course, a Satanist and everything that goes with it. But I probably discussed with him other things. And I know that the guy is probably what he did was evil, but he sincerely believed he was actually helping the United States with his experiments and with his things. So at the time, for me,
how so? How so? I'm just trying to understand that rationing. How he would think he's helping.
Because he basically said that if we didn't use those techniques, the enemy will use them. So we will have to be knowledgeable about those techniques and use them first. It's like the nuclear weapon deterrent. If only Russia and China has it, the United States will be left with nothing, naked. So that's what his mindset. It was to put together these techniques so that we could guarantee the superiority of the United States. I mean, there is one thing that is important to understand about Michael Aquino. I personally disliked, when I understood what it was all about, certain things I completely disliked. But I have to, and that's why in this book I wrote a brief personal note about Michael Aquino and my relationship with him, because I wanted people to have clear this point. I never endorse Aquino's activities as an occultist with the Temple of Set. I was highly critical. In fact, we wanted to invite him to Monte Carlo because some of the people in Monaco, some of the heads of the Monte Carlo Lodge, were actually wanting to threaten him, and some of them even wanting to bury him alive. So, I mean, that was the kind of setup. However, Michael Aquino was probably understood that, and in fact, he never showed up in Monte Carlo. I even published a letter he wrote me saying, "Oh, I can't make." He's like, "Dear Mr. Zagami and Mr. Junquilla, thank you for your kind invitation to meet with you in Monte Carlo. Please accept my apologies. My current responsibilities will probably keep me stuck in California for the time being." He kind of like was very diplomatic about it. But here we're talking about a guy who was part of the psychological operations and whose actual influence, and I showed this influence, because this guy had written a groundbreaking paper in 1980, and that paper became the beginning of a complete change in the way psychological operations will be conducted in the US military. So it's important to understand that. And in fact, in my introduction to the book, I say, at one point, I say the motto of the psychological operations here in the US, an important motto. But I say also another thing. I say in the introduction, I hope that the last word can be ours, because they say the word is what wins. That is what in psychological operation, the word wins. The ghost into the machine, the ghosts in the machine that they project. And I say, I hope the last word can be ours, not theirs. That is very important.
Right.
Okay, so because otherwise maybe people can speculate and say, "Oh, but Leo Zagami this, Leo Zagami that." No, Leo Zagami is somebody who has gone through all these experiences, wants to share them with you in the hope that we can become aware. Now, in the 4 psychological operation groups recites verbum vincere, the word will conquer. And I'm quoting here my own book, the introduction, I say, let's hope it is our word and not theirs, as the latest development in modern psychological operation sounds like a creation of the late Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, one of Satan's little helpers. So I hope that today I gave you a good glimpse of my latest book, and I hope that you enjoyed it.
I really like Satan's little helper.
Yeah, he was definitely the biggest creep I ever met. Even if I didn't meet in person, I met him.
No, but seriously, the first time I heard about him, and the first time I heard about him was interviewing Jesse Zabota 4 years ago. In fact, on the 1st of September, which is Sunday, is the birthday of this channel, 4 years old. So happy birthday to Aquarius Rising, everybody. Yay, 4 years old on Sunday. But Michael Aquino was one of her abusers. He was one of her chief abusers, handlers. Yeah.
You see, he tended to always dismiss the Presidio case there in San Francisco that involved them directly with the possible abuse of minors. He tended always to dismiss that. He said that there was no factual evidence, though there was actually testimony from children, and he silenced a lot of people conveniently by his position in the military. He was able to kind of, you see, what happened with Aquino was that he went to Europe, and a lot of the work that is done now by NATO and cognitive warfare comes also from his teachings from that time. But he went to Europe and he conducted, and I talked about this in Invisible Master especially, but also in other, I mentioned it, I think, in other parts of my confessions. He conducted this ritual at the Bessenburg castle of the SS in Germany, the castle that used to be Himmler's headquarters. After he conducted that ritual, he says that for revenge, the Jewish establishment here in the US tried to use that case against him. I personally think that the case actually probably was true. He had probably abused minors. And I think that he was creepy enough to maybe do that. I don't know.
Maybe. I have no doubt that I have no doubt. There's been more than one survivor that has named him, most definitely. So seriously, but hang on. When I first heard about him, I actually Googled to see what he looked like. I mean, when you look at this guy, I mean, come on, his eyebrows. How do those not look like the devil's horns? Right there and then, you would know that he belongs to little Satan. He's little Satan's helper there. I mean, seriously.
I said that there is friends of Aquino who said that I looked like Anton LaVey, and I said, I'm nothing like Anton LaVey, you know? I mean, I remember when back in 2001, in a retreat of the OTO, Carl Abramson, who is himself very high up, both in the Church of Satan and then in the Temple of Set, and who was a personal friend of Anton LaVey, as well as Aquino, and who is still alive. Carl Abramson is still quite young, he's my age. He said, Leo, you look like LaVey. I want to propose you something. Come out with me. So I went out with him. We were like in the middle of nowhere in the Norwegian countryside in this retreat. I said, Leo, if you have $350,000, I have an opportunity for you. You can buy the Black House of LaVey in San Francisco. Marilyn Manson doesn't want it, but we need to have a buyer. Otherwise, they're going to destroy it. I was like, yeah, whatever. It was destroyed, fortunately. I didn't buy it.
It's fine. It's fine. You can keep it.
You can keep it.
You can have it. It's fine.
Absolutely. So thank you.
I'm good.
I think that you gave the opportunity of a brilliant chat today, and I brought out probably stuff that
I learned today. Thank you, Leo, and I know everyone else did too. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us again for our monthly chat with Leo. Look forward to seeing you in 4 weeks' time again. Check out www.leozagami.com. That's his link for his website, and grab a copy of his new book. I'm getting a copy now. Is it on Kindle yet? Because, you know, I can't order from Amazon.
Both on Kindle and paper.
Okay. I'm going to get it on Kindle. I'll definitely get it on Kindle because...
Read the book, and maybe next month, once you read it, you have other questions for me in our next chat.
I look forward. I will definitely do that. Looking forward to that. And thank you again, everybody. Leo, it was absolutely fascinating. And thank you for spilling some tea for us.
Bye-bye. God bless you guys. Regardless of the spooky subjects we discuss, and of course, the most spooky one, Michael Aquino at the end, I think he's definitely one of the main characters in my new book, because you will discover that thanks to him, unfortunately, we are leading our military in the wrong direction. Let's bring them back to Christ, because I think they're getting too lost in the devil diableries here. All the best.
Absolutely. God bless, Leo. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. Have a beautiful weekend. I'll see you tomorrow night with Caleb on Patreon. Watch the space. I'll let you guys know tomorrow. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. See you soon.